Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Atifa and today's video is going to be a little bit different because we are going to be talking about a serious issue, an issue that I've never really talked about before. I'm not a politician, so just before I begin, I'm going to be giving a little bit of a disclaimer. Everything I'm saying here reflects my own opinion. I'm not a political expert. I may occasionally say the incorrect phrase and use the incorrect language to describe something, so I'd just like to give an apology in advance. Feel free to correct any mistakes that I make down in the comments, just so that I know and can improve for the future. So this video is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to be talking about books regarding the apartheid and genocide going on in Palestine, and it is a much heavier topic than my typical YouTube videos. So I will be separating the video into several sections. That way you can just click on the type of book that you prefer reading or the type of genre that you prefer reading. And I do apologize in advance if I yap too much because I am going to be talking about a lot of books and it is a heavier content matter. So I would suggest that you listen to this video like a podcast instead of watching me talk. But that's it for the disclaimer. Let's just get right into it. So the first section of this video, I'm going to be talking about the nonfiction books, the books that are rooted in actual facts in history, books that have been written by both historians and politicians alike. So people who have really done rigorous research into the topic of the war on Palestine, as well as the occupation and Zionism. So the first book that I'm going to be talking about is The 100 Years' War on Palestine, A History of Settler Colonial Conquest and Resistance from 1917 to 2017 by Rashid Khalidi. And this author is a historian on Palestine. He himself is Palestinian. It basically goes through the past 100 years, but one of the reasons why I really like this book is because I listened to it as an audio and it was very easy to understand for a general audience. You don't have to be a specific expert in the field to understand what he's trying to say. He takes a lot of different sources from Israelis, Palestinians, foreign officials, and really tries to break down what happened throughout those 100 years. The next book that I read is called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. Again, you can listen to this one as an audio book. The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine is by Ilan Pappé, who is actually, I believe, born Israeli or a Zionist settler, but he himself, through being enlisted in the IDF and through his own experiences as an Israeli, has really taken the time to understand more about Zionism and the harms of settler colonialism and apartheid on the Palestinian indigenous people. So he ended up writing a bunch of books on Palestine, one of them being The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. The reason why I like this book is because Ilan Pappé manages to give you a lot of different examples of international law, a lot of different examples of when apartheid or ethnic cleansing has occurred in other parts of the world. For example, he gives a lot of, he talks a lot about Bosnia, he talks a lot about Czechoslovakia, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, just a few different regions of the world that he mentions in the book that really kind of highlight the similarities about what happened there and what is happening in Palestine, as well as the differences in reaction between the UN, foreign organizations, foreign politics, and how they all play into what's going on in Palestine. By the way, I will be leaving the link for the audiobook of these two books down below, just so that everybody has the opportunity to give it a listen and obviously expand their knowledge. The next book is actually by a author, Isabella Hamad. It's called Recognizing the Stranger on Palestine and Narrative. This one is really short. I believe it is like 50 pages. You can read it in a day. This book is, I think, based off a speech that Isabella Hamad had delivered before, and then she repurposed it and turned it into a book so that more people can have access to it and read about it. So this one is definitely more modern, and I just started reading it, but I haven't finished it, so I can't give you a full review. But I do know that Rashid Khalidi, the author of the first book I talked about, has read this and gave it a stellar review, and a lot of other people have given it a stellar review. It's like a collection of essays by Isabella Hamad. The next book is called I Shall Not Hate, A Gaza Doctor's Journey on the Road to Peace and Human Dignity by Izzeldin Abu Ileish. And this one is really interesting, and I might read it next year. It is basically a nonfiction memoir about the author's life. He is basically a Palestinian doctor. He was trained in America and then works as a doctor in Palestine. And throughout his life as a doctor, as a medical professional, he has had to work and treat patients of all backgrounds, whether that be Palestinian, whether that be Israelis, whether that be the foreign officials or the foreign workers who work in the humanitarian field. It's a really interesting story because he basically talks about, instead of seeking revenge or sinking into hatred, he calls for the people in the region to start talking to each other. His deepest hopes is that his daughters will be the last sacrifice on the road to peace between Palestine and Israelis. His daughters were killed by Israeli soldiers in 2009. So yeah, it seems like this might be a really impactful and powerful book, and I will definitely add it to my TBR. Next is another short book that I haven't read, but I know that it's getting a lot of attention in the booktube community, and that's called What Does Israel Fear from Palestine by Raja Shehadeh. And this one is another short 100-page book. I like this one, and this one seems interesting to me because the previous books that I talked about, the historical books I talked about, really talk about the Nakba, the Aliyah, the Intifada, but her book talks more about what is going on in the modern times. And it was also written post October 7th. So one of the reviews says that it's like a brief and necessary summation of the events that lead up to October 7th, which I also think gives us, especially non-Palestinian, non-Middle Eastern people, really good contextual background about the current and most latest genocide going on. Another book also by the same author is actually a memoir, and it's called We Could Have Been Friends, My Father and I. This one sounds so interesting to me. I think this one's also pretty short. It's 160 pages. So Raja talks about how his father was an activist in his time, and Raja himself is also an activist and humanitarian worker in his time. So let me just read this so I don't get it wrong. His father was a lawyer, activist, political detainee. And Raja himself is campaigning for Palestinian human rights in his own way. But because of these two different ways that father and son choose to basically campaign and fight for their freedom, there's actually a lot of internal conflict between father and son figure. It's really interesting to me because something that I've learned a lot recently is that especially with like dialoguing with people who are older than me and kind of going to workshops and seminars and discussing ideas with people that are older than me, it's funny because a lot of people, old and young alike, have pretty similar values and ideas on like nation building, on doing what's right for the country, doing what's right for a nation, for society. And yet, despite this, because our differences in the ways that we approach these issues, a lot of conflict ends up happening between people who are basically on the same side. So just reading the synopsis of this memoir kind of gives me that same vibe. So yeah. The next book I have is The Lemon Tree, An Arab, a Jew, and the Heart of the Middle East by Sandy Tolan. So this book is a nonfiction book, but a lot of people who have read it have said that it kind of reads like fiction. It basically has 2 points of view, one from a Palestinian and one from an Israeli, and the book kind of is an amalgamation of the 2 perspectives. In 1967, Bashir, a Palestinian, journeyed to Israel with the goal of seeing his beloved stone house, which obviously his stone house is now occupied by an Israeli settler. When he comes to his house, he was greeted by Dalia, an Ashkenazi 19-year-old Israeli student. Dalia and Bashir begin a rare friendship forged in the aftermath of war and tested over the next 30 years. Sandy Tolan brings the Israeli-Palestinian conflict down to its most human level, suggesting that even amid the bleakest political realities, there exist stories of hope and reconciliation. For the last nonfiction book, I have a book by Jihad Abdul Salim. Well, actually, it's like a collection of many different authors, and it's called Light in Gaza, Writings Born in Fire. It's a 300-page book, but it is like a collection of many different stories, essays, I believe also some poetry. What made me interested to read this is because Rifat Al-Arir, the university professor and historian that passed away last year, there is I believe his poetry in this book. So Light in Gaza is a moving and wide-ranging anthology of Palestinian writers and artists. It's a collective effort to organize and center Palestinian voices amidst the ongoing struggle. Moving on, we're going to be talking about fiction, specifically historical fiction, but not all. And the first book that I have in this category is called Mornings in Jenin by Susan Abdul Hawa. I cannot stress to you how beautiful this story is, how poignant this story is, how well written it was. It made me cry multiple times. This is basically the kind of book that talks about the lives of people in a refugee camp. What happens when people are displaced? How do they continue their lives in displacement? And also a little bit about what happened in the past with the Israelis stealing babies. That's all I'm gonna say. I don't want to say anything else, but it is a beautiful story, a moving tale about love and loss. The next book is a novella, so it's a really short story. It's like a collection of short stories by Ghassan Kanafani, and it's called All That's Left to You. So I haven't read this myself, but I do know that Ghassan Kanafani is a very, very famous Palestinian author, a very well-respected author. All That's Left to You presents the vivid story of 24 hours in the real and remembered lives of brother and sister living in Gaza, separated from their family. The desert and time emerges as characters as Kanafani speaks through the desert, the brother and the sister, to build the powerful rhythm of the narrative. The Palestinian attachment to land and family and sorrow over their loss are symbolized by the young man's unremitting anger and shame over his sister's sexual disgrace. The collection of stories provides evidence to the English reading public of Kanafani's position within modern Arabic literature. Not only was he committed to portraying the miseries and aspirations of the Palestinians, but he was also an innovator within the extensive world of Arabic fiction. So I think this might be the first Kanafani book that I end up reading. Next, I have another Susan Abdulhawa book called The Blue Between Sky and Water. I'm not going to get into the synopsis of the book of what it's about, but I will tell you the themes are about the diaspora. So the main character is a Palestinian living in the United States. What happens when the diaspora returns to their home? Because I'm sure a lot of you might know that feeling of being from a certain country, but being raised in another country, and then maybe coming back for holiday and seeing that you don't really fit in any place. So in this character's case, she's not really American in America, but she's also not really Palestinian in Palestine. So it's kind of like the main character traversing through these cultural shifts. I have another Susan Abdulhawa book, Against the Loveless World, and I believe this might be her most famous novel. Against the Loveless World is a novel about the main character, Nahr, and the story starts off with her being in prison, in an Israeli prison. So we already know that whatever she gets up to will ultimately lead to her being imprisoned by the Israeli police forces and government. So it's kind of moving, it shifts between present and past timeline, and it's about her whole life being Palestinian, moving to Jordan and then Kuwait. In Kuwait, feeling a sense of displacement, feeling a sense of exclusion because I guess you are labeled as an immigrant, and that label might come with a certain amount of struggle and obstacle and challenges, and then ultimately moving back to Palestine and what that entails for her, which ultimately leads to her imprisonment. The next book I just started reading, so I don't know too much about it, but it's by Isabella Hamad, the author that I talked about in the nonfiction section. It's called Enter Ghost. And this book is also really hyped in the booktube world. Isabella Hamad tells a story about, what is her name? Okay, so Sonia Nasir returns to Palestine to see her sister Hanin. And Sonia lives in the UK with her father, whereas Hanin lives in Palestine. So Sonia is basically coming for her summer break from teaching, basically. Finds herself entangled in pretty much similar activities that she does back in London, which is running a theater and being part of a theater production. So that's like the main themes of the story. But in this story, the author will actually get into, the complexities of being a Palestinian in the modern day, such as having to travel through all the different checkpoints to get from one neighborhood to another neighborhood, all the different labels and harassment that she will eventually face as a Palestinian, even though her nationality states that she's not Palestinian. So yeah, let me read you one of the reviews for this. Hamad beautifully captures the internal voice of an actor, as well as familial bonding. She also deftly handles the complexity of various Palestinian experiences, the different rights and freedoms assigned based on so many arbitrary factors, and the oppressive military presence and surveillance that lends a sense of foreboding to the everyday. So I really like this book because, or I'm interested in reading this book because it gives a more modern context to the present day lives of Palestinians. The next book is Salt Houses by Hala Ayan, and another book that I'm interested in reading next year. Basically, it's about a family, and the family is uprooted from their town or city during the Six-Day War of 1967. So Salma is forced to leave her home in Nablus. Alia's brother gets pulled into a politically militarized world he can't escape. And Alia and her husband move to Kuwait City, where they reluctantly build a life with their 3 children. When Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait, Alia and her family once again lose their home, their land, and their story as they once know it, scattering to Beirut, Paris, Boston, and beyond. So, similar to Against the Loveless World, they're set in Kuwait, but I do love a good diaspora tale because being part of the diaspora is not easy. Moving to country after country, looking for that feeling of home and not finding it and being disappointed and missing your true home, that's just that's what I get from reading the synopsis of this book. Next, I'm going to be talking about only 2 books, and this is in the poetry section. So Mahmoud Darwish is a very, 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 very famous Palestinian author, poet, and this book is called Journal of an Ordinary Grief. Every beautiful poem is an act of resistance, says Darwish. He is both the voice of the Palestinian people and one of the most transcendent poets of his generation. His poetry calls upon myth, memory, and language to delve into the poet's experience of house arrest, his encounters with Israeli interrogators, and the periods he spent in prison. This is actually an essay collection. I'm not sure if it's a poetry collection, but in this essay collection, his essays ask vital questions about the existential complexities that Palestinians in Israel face and the ambiguity of Darwish's own identity as an Israeli Palestinian. Last but not least, a very recent release published in October of 2024 is a book by Musab Abu Toha. It's only 96 pages. It's called Forest of Noise. It's a poetry collection. It says here that it is a candid, horrific, and deeply touching collection of poems about life in Gaza. Barely 30 years old, Musab was already a well-known poet when caught in the current siege of Gaza. He and his family fled for safety. Somehow, amid the chaos, he kept writing poems. These are those poems. Moving between glimpses of life in relative peacetime and poems about surviving the barely livable occupation, Forest of Noise invites a wide audience into an experience that defies the imagination, even as it is watched live. Abu Toha's poems introduce readers to his extended family, some of them no longer with us. This is an urgent, extraordinary, and arrestingly whimsical book. So that's pretty much it for all the books that I'm going to be talking about in this video. I am sure there are countless other amazing books, highly educative and eye-opening books, but I haven't read them or heard about them yet to be able to recommend them to you. But you can definitely leave suggestions on what you think I should read down below. I did think that this video was really important to make. I've wanted to make this video for the past 3 months maybe, but I really wanted to give it some thought. I didn't want to just I didn't want to make a video for the sake of making a video, so I really wanted to pick and curate the best books to give you, the reader, the best understanding of the conflict, the apartheid, the genocide in Palestine. There are also several other books not based in Palestine, but do reflect similar themes, such as Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book called The Message. A little bit of Palestine is mentioned in there, as well as Nelson Mandela's memoir, A Long Walk to Freedom. So those two books are also really good, but I don't know enough about them to really give you a full recommendation. So I would just like to thank you for taking the time to listen to me, to watch, to learn, to open your heart, mind, soul. I will leave links on, how you can help donate, but also how you can help with being more aware about what's going on and what continues to go on. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye.